Hi, I'm Rashonda, and I'm the founder of artbyro.com, where you can find over 200 art and drawing tutorials that will show you step by step how to do some things. My goal is to help as many people as possible learn to love their art and enjoy their creative time more freely. If this sounds interesting to you, hit the like and subscribe button and follow us on YouTube. So in today's video, we're going to head on over to the studio and we're going to look at how to draw some parrots. I'm going to show you one way to do it. Hopefully you enjoy it and it inspires you to do some of your own. Let's head on over to the studio now and get started. Before working on my drawings, something I often do is a quick warm-up exercise. It only takes a few minutes. It's really easy to do. All you need is something to draw with. It could be a pen, pencil, doesn't matter. You could use paint if you wanted to use paint. And then just some scrap paper. And all you want to do is just to kind of, it serves two purposes. One is to warm up, and the other is to kind of work through some ideas, get some basic, just get a general feel for what it is you're drawing, the basic characteristics of it. So today our drawing is going to be a parrot, and there's a lot of different ways you can draw these. You can do something realistic, you can do something cartoon, you could do it exaggerated, and you may have something in mind, and then after doing these warm-ups, maybe you come up with something different, something better, something a little more original. And all you do is just real quickly, with some loose lines, get your ideas down. Get a feel for what you're drawing. What do you want it to look like? What kind of style do you want it to be in? Like I said, this should only take a couple minutes. It's nothing that you want to spend a ton of time on, and you don't need to be really detailed. Just get the basic ideas down. Shapes, sizes, proportions. You know, what characteristics do you want your parrot to have? You can start thinking about the colors. Obviously, we're not adding the colors right now, but you could think about the different colors and just work through some basic ideas and get a feel for it. It's just to get you warmed up and to get you some basic idea of where you're going to go with your drawing, so that when you're starting your actual artwork, you don't feel as intimidated. You already have a little bit of an idea of what you're doing, what the general features are of a parrot, what kind of pose maybe that you want it to have, because there's a lot of variations in everything that we draw. And as you can see, nothing real fancy. You can go back in and refine it a little bit more if you want. But just get some basic ideas down and get yourself warmed up a little bit, so when it's time to do your actual drawing, you're ready to go, you're loose, and you have a basic idea of what you want to do. So a couple minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, fill up your paper, just get some rough sketches in. And like I said, really good way to warm up, really good way to work through some quick ideas and get you ready to dive into your actual drawing. So we did our little warm-up practice sketch, and now we're ready to draw our parrot. Hopefully you got a little bit of a feel for the style you want to draw, what you want your parrot to look like. I want to do mine in somewhat of a cartoon style. But I'm still going to lay it out in some basic shapes because it helps get everything laid out where we want it to be. It helps with the size, proportions, And another thing that doing the basic shapes first helps with is getting over that fear of having the blank page, or what's called the blank page syndrome, which is just where you have a hard time getting started. You stare at the blank paper, you don't know what to do, you're intimidated, whatever the reasoning is. It helps get over that because we've already made some marks on our paper, but there's not a lot of pressure behind it because all we're doing is laying out some basic shapes of where everything's going to be. So you want a little bit bigger oval for the body. You can do a circle for the head. And then from there, we can start laying out some of the details. So I'm going to put in where the wings going to go. And I'm not doing a ton of details yet, even at this stage. I still just want to get things laid out and make sure I like the look, the size, and then from there I can add in the little extra details. So still just roughing it out. I know I want the eye to be a little bit oversized, especially when you're drawing a cartoon style. Drawing the eyes a little bit bigger makes them look softer, cuter, a little more childish, I guess. It's just a personal preference. So you need to do your drawings in whatever way that is comfortable for you and whatever feels right, whatever fits your style. The point of these videos are to get you a place to start from. And then from there, I'd rather see you change it and make it your own than to follow exactly the way that I do it. And if you don't really know what your style is, you're just learning, you're trying to develop a style, then it's perfectly fine to just do a straight copy of something. There's nothing wrong with that. But the idea is to get you to work on your own style, develop your skills, get comfortable. And like I said, I do these videos not because I want people to draw things the way I draw them. My goal is just to get you started, give you the confidence to do your own drawings, feel comfortable doing them. I want you to feel like you know what you're doing in the direction you're going in. So all I'm doing now is adding in the little fine details. I should probably mention I'm doing my drawing on an artist trading card. I do a lot of them on these because it saves time, and I don't really like hanging on to my artwork. So I'll do them on the artist trading cards, and then I'll trade them to other artists for their artwork. And then I have binders full of artist trading cards that other people did. So what I'm doing is adding in some details, refining the shape, adding in the feathers. And again, a lot of it is just personal preference. Things like putting the feathers here at the bottom part of the head, that's optional. You can add these feathers here or not. As you can see, I'm making my parrot look a little bit exaggerated. That is a personal preference. I like the way it looks. If that looks strange to you or if it doesn't appeal to you, that's fine. You can make yours look a little bit more realistic. And you can do that. One of the ways, like I said, is this oversized eye. You don't have to do yours that way. If you don't like that style or you don't like the way it looks, then change it up. Do it in your own style. I'm going to have him sitting on a branch just so he's not floating in midair. And then we'll just add some little oval shapes down here for the feet. So I did 3 here, then I need to do 3 there, and just curve them a little bit to make it look like they're gripping the branch. And then we can go back in later and erase the lines that we don't need. Even though I know I'm going to erase some of this branch, it's easier to draw everything out completely and then just go right over the top of it and then erase what we don't need. It helps keep all the lines straight instead of trying to line stuff up, and then it a lot of times doesn't look quite right. For the tail, I'm just going to add a couple little indications of feathers down there. I'm not going to put a ton of detail. And then the only thing really left to do on this is to add some extra details in the wings. And again, you can add these or not. You could add more, you could make them more detail. Same thing with the belly. If you wanted to add a little texture to the belly, you could. Again, very much a personal preference, whatever you think looks good. And I think this is just about done for the rough sketch of it. So the next step is going to be to do an outline, and then we'll add some color. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do the outline. I usually use an outlining pen. I have a few different brands. The Sharpies work okay. I typically don't like Sharpie, but these outlining pens work really well. And then there's also brush pens, which in my opinion is really the best type of pen to use for your outlining. However, it does take a little bit of practice to get used to it and to be able to control it the way you want. The way the brush pen works is it has this tapered point and it's flexible, so as you put pressure on it, your lines can get thicker or thinner just by controlling the pressure. I used to use brush pens a lot in my artwork years ago, and I took a break for about 6 years because of my work schedule, and I just lost focus of my art and it being a priority in my life. But I used to use these a lot, and I got away from it, so I'm not very comfortable with them anymore, and that's definitely something that I need to work on. It's on my list of goals for what I want to do with my art, which it's been that for a little bit now, so I guess I should probably make an effort to start working on that again. But in the meantime, I usually just use the Sharpie pen. And there's different ways you can do your outline. And all I'm doing is I'm just going right over top of the pencil lines that I want to keep. And you can make your lines thin, you can make them thick. I use a black pen because that's just the style that I like. You could use a different color. You could do your lines thinner, you could do them thicker. If you don't want the heavy outline, you could just color your drawing, or maybe you could outline it in a colored pencil or something. I don't know. There's a lot of different options. Again, you do not have to do what I'm doing. I'm showing you one way to do things, with the hopes that you'll take that and build from it and develop your own style and techniques. This is just a starting point, just to get you going, give you some ideas to work from, whether you're just starting out or just looking for something different. Sometimes you see something, you feel kind of stuck, and then you see something and maybe it just triggers a different idea altogether. and that's fine too. You can start drawing a parrot just because it looks like it's different and fun, just for something to do, and maybe halfway through it sparks some kind of inspiration or creativity for something completely different, which that would be great. That's not a bad thing. My brain doesn't stick with one thing very often, so I totally get the jumping around and not being able to stay focused on what it is you are trying to accomplish. But I don't see that as always being a bad thing. Sometimes I feel like if your mind takes you off in another direction, maybe there's a reason for it. So after you do your outline, you can take an eraser. This came with a set of pencils. I used to use the pink pearl eraser all the time, but what happens with this, you can see the smudges on it, and you have to keep this cleaned off or it'll transfer onto your paper. I had this eraser just laying around that I got with, I think it came with a set of pencils, but I'm not 100% sure where it even came from. It came with something. I didn't intentionally buy it. But what I found is that it's really messy, which I thought was kind of annoying at first. But then I realized as you're using it, it doesn't get the smudges on the eraser because the eraser crumbles apart as you're using it. So it's kind of like a self-cleaning eraser, which is actually kind of nice because it doesn't leave the smudges on your paper like some of the other erasers do. Because a lot of times what will happen is that lead that transfers onto your paper sometimes is a little harder to get off of there. It doesn't erase the same way that your pencil lines will. All right, so that's my outline. I cleaned it up, got rid of all the pencil lines I don't need. I'm gonna go in and touch this up a little bit. Sometimes when you erase, you'll see where there's some gaps in your outline. So if you see that, no big deal, just go back in, fill them in. Again, you could do your outline with a different color. I don't typically do that. I should try it a little bit just to see what it looks like. You can also get, in the same Sharpie brand, they have different colors you could use too. They come in all different colors and different styles and sizes. So that's it for the outline. The next thing we're going to do is grab some markers and we're going to color it in. Okay, so to finish off our drawing, we just need to add some color. And what I'll typically do, since I usually use markers, is I'll get a piece of scrap paper that's just cut from cardstock, and I'll use it to see how closely the colors are together and how well they're going to blend. Typically, I'll use at least 2 colors on each section, sometimes 3, depending on what it is that I'm doing, what colors I'm using, what markers I have available to me. And what you want to do is have your base color, like your medium color, and then something that's a little lighter or something that's a little darker. If you don't have a ton of markers available to you, what you can do is just use 2 colors and do your middle tone and then a darker one to add some shadows. And then you can use a jelly roll or a paint marker to add white highlights. And that way you get your different values in there, even though the white's not actually another value, but it'll at least get you some highlights in there, and then you'll have your shadows and your highlights. And the only thing you need to make sure of is that if you want to blend your colors together, you need to make sure you're using alcohol-based markers, which a lot of your permanent markers are going to be alcohol-based, so you don't need to worry about it too much. You don't have to have fancy markers to do this. It's a preference and whatever your budget is. If you don't have to worry about how much money you're spending on your art supplies, then Copic are really good markers. I really don't use them. I have a couple that I bought just to try them out, but they're super expensive. I bought mine years ago, and I want to say they were like $6 or $7 a marker. That was just the open stock. I'm sure you can probably get them in sets cheaper, you know, per marker. But I didn't have the money to invest in a bunch of markers, especially not knowing if I felt like it was worth it or not. I just do my drawings as a hobby. It's something I enjoy doing, and that doesn't require me to have super expensive markers. I actually like these Bic markers a lot. The only thing I don't like about them is that you're a little bit limited on the colors, but usually you can make it work. They have enough variety available that you can find colors that blend nicely together. But what I don't like about them is that you can't buy individual colors. Like this blue, I use a lot, and it tends to run out fairly quickly because of the amount that I use it. And I can't just buy 1 or 2 or 3 of these. I have to buy them in an entire pack. And which means you have a bunch of extra markers, which works out eventually. When you have a marker you don't use a lot and it runs out, you already have one of them in your supplies, but you end up with a lot of extra markers because some of them you just don't use that often. And then you end up accumulating a lot of extra markers that you'll probably never use, just to get the colors that you need. And I also like to have a lot of extras on hand for the colors that I know I'm going to be using often. So what I'm doing is I'm laying down my lightest color first, and then going over it with my darker color, and then I use the lighter color again to go back in and blend the colors together. And something that comes up a lot that I've had a lot of people ask me about is they'll say, well, won't it ruin the marker when you go back over a darker color with it? And the answer to that is no. You can go over a dark color or a different color with a lighter marker, and it won't transfer onto the other marker. So you don't have to worry about that. You're not going to ruin your markers by going back and forth over top of them. So I'm doing the same thing with the blue. So you can see with this one, I think the camera picks this up enough. You can see that there's quite a bit of contrast between these two blues. But I can go right back over the edge and blend this and get rid of that hard edge and make it a softer transition. Now, if you want that hard edge, that's fine. That's just not what my style is. So I typically, in most of my drawings, I'll get rid of that hard edge just by going back over it with the lighter marker. If you don't mind the hard edge, or if you like that hard edge where the two colors come together, that's perfectly fine. I would say just make sure you're being deliberate in what you're doing. Meaning if you're leaving the hard edge, that you're doing that intentionally and not because you're not following the techniques you should be using. And that's the cool thing about art, is you have the freedom to do absolutely whatever you want to do. You don't have to follow a set of rules. You don't have to do what everybody else does. You can learn from other people and take their ideas and do your own work, and then use whatever you picked up that you found beneficial. And if it doesn't fit with your style or your goals or whatever, then you don't have to use what other people are saying. I think it's good to watch a variety of different artists and to try to learn different things from them. Even if it's not somebody who's, maybe you don't like their technique or you don't like their style of art, but it doesn't mean you can't learn something from them and maybe change it a little bit and apply it to your own artwork. So I'm just doing the same thing with each one of the colors. Just going in and adding some darker areas. When I'm adding these darker areas, I'm just thinking about where there might be some shadows. And then breaking up the color in those areas by adding in some shadows. And I usually color in the entire section with my base color. You don't have to do that. Like, if you know where you're going to put your dark colors in, you don't necessarily have to put the lighter color in that area. One thing you should keep in mind is that your colors are going to look different if you layer them or if you just put them next to each other. So just keep that in mind. You're going to get a little bit of a different look. Obviously, by filling in the entire area with the marker that's going to get covered up anyway, is going to use more markers. It's going to use more of that color up. But part of it is just that that's how I work. And I like how the colors look a little bit better when they're layered. It adds a little bit more depth to them, which creating depth is why we're using multiple markers in the same area to begin with. And the other thing I should mention is that even though I'm doing a lot of red, I'm doing it a section at a time. I'm coloring it in a section at a time because you want these markers to be wet when you're blending them. And they're alcohol based, so that alcohol is going to evaporate. And once it evaporates, you're not going to be able to blend these colors together. They're blending together because it's wet and that alcohol hasn't evaporated yet. And you can see I have some Prismacolor, I have some Bic markers, I have some of these Arteza markers, which I bought because you can buy individual colors. They're pretty cheap. So far, I can't say I've been super impressed with them. When I first bought them, a couple of the colors were dried out. When I opened them up, they went straight into the garbage. And that could be just from that supplier, maybe. It doesn't necessarily reflect on the brand. But I bought a lot of these markers a long time ago. Like, these Prismacolors are probably at least 10 years old, and they sat for a long time not getting used. And they still work perfectly fine. The only problem I have is it's a dual tip. And this tip that has the fine point on it, a lot of these, the ink doesn't work, but I never cared for this particular tip on these markers anyway, which I think when you buy them now, I don't think that tip exists anymore. I think they redesigned it. So it probably wasn't the best to begin with. You can go in with, this is a white Jelly Roll pen. You can use that to add some white highlights to your drawings. It goes over the marker really, really nicely. I like how it looks on the marker. And you don't have to do this. That's optional. I just like to break up the big areas of color a little bit. And it's really easy to go overboard with the white and add too much, so I would caution that less is more in this case. And I'm going to add a background on here. Again, the background is optional, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can add in areas of color, and again, I'm going to do a couple of colors, and I'm using these, they're kind of a blue-gray. I use this gray color quite a bit for my backgrounds, just to fill in all the white. Another thing that I do a lot is to just add a kind of like a halo, I call it, around the edges. You could do a combination of the two. Obviously, you can do whatever you want. It's your artwork. I think it's a good idea to experiment and try new things. If you've never done a background, you never filled your background in, I think it's good to try some different things and see what you like. You don't want your background to take away from your artwork. You want it to add to it, make it look better. But sometimes the backgrounds can look a little too plain, a little too boring. But again, everything's very much a personal preference, and you should always do whatever feels right to you and feels like it fits with your style. And if you don't know what your style is, it just means you need to experiment a little bit more, do some more art, try some things, experiment. And that's why I really like using the artist trading cards for my drawings, because it allows me to experiment a little bit more freely without feeling like I'm taking a big risk and chancing something, and like, what if I mess up and I just spent hours and hours on this drawing trying to make it perfect, and then I experiment with something and try something new, and now I feel like my art is ruined. By doing the drawings on the artist trading cards, since they're a little bit smaller, you don't have as much time invested in them, so it really frees you up to try some different things, experiment. And I like doing what I call the 7-day challenge, which is to, if I'm going to draw a parrot, I wouldn't do just one parrot, I would do 7. And try to do all 7 within a week. And sometimes I can do them in a week, and sometimes I get busy and it takes a little bit longer. The time that it takes isn't super important. If you want to get the benefits of pushing your creativity, it matters a little bit. If you're spreading your drawings out over a long period of time, it's a little harder to tap into your creativity. Where if you do them closer together, you can build off of them. And I should probably also mention, this paper is just because they'll bleed through even with this cardstock. The markers bleed through. and obviously for the edges. So I just have a piece of scrap cardboard that I use. So that's it for the parrot drawing. I hope this inspired you to try doing some of your own and to try some different things out. And I will talk to you in the next video. I will see you soon, and happy creating.